We have the real experts here to sort it out, including the Wall Street Journal's James Freeman, a Simpler Trading Director of Operations and Trader Specialist Danielle Shay, and the National Review contributing editor DeRoy Murdoch. DeRoy, end with you, begin with you. So the vibes I'm getting from the markets, and one day that's not a trend make, is that we think the president survives this. It looks unseemly, trying to cajole a foreign leader to do your bidding, but no constitutional crisis. What do you think?
It looks that way to me. I mean, we heard 24 hours ago that this was going to be an indication of the total corruption and graft of President Trump. Adam Schiff says today this is how a mafia boss sounds. I read the transcript and it looked like a very friendly conversation. President Trump and President Zelensky of Ukraine were just laughing and kind of joking with each other. They talked about corruption in general and trying to clean up corruption overall. And as part of that, they said, let's take a look. Please cooperate with us as we look at the genesis of the Russiagate probe. And also, by the way, if you find out anything related to Biden, we want to know about that, too.
Well, and that does have at least an icky.
Well, I don't know. I mean, if in fact Joe Biden engaged in obstruction of justice by telling the predecessor president of Ukraine, you're not going to get your $1 billion loan guarantee unless you fire the prosecutor who's going after my son, and you've got 6 hours to make a decision. That sounds much more like something.
But I think what is at issue is the present occupant of the Oval Office sounding this, and what prompts this discussion, Danielle, is this comment from the back and forth he had with the leader of the Ukraine. There's a lot of talk about Biden's son. This is Hunter Biden, of course, who sits on the board of this natural gas concern. That Biden stopped the prosecution. A lot of people want to find out about that, to DeRoy's point. That so whatever you can do with the attorney general, he's referring to Bill Barr, might call him, would be great. Biden went around bragging, this is the president still talking about Joe Biden, that he stopped the prosecution. So if you can look into it, it sounds horrible to me. That's where that mafiosa comment comes in.
Yes, and it's definitely a very sticky situation because on one hand, I mean, I can understand where President Trump is coming from because, you always have the Democrats coming after him and trying to uncover the different types of things that he's doing. And so on one hand, it makes a little bit of sense that if he thinks there's something going wrong here, then the person who it's involving, which is Ukraine, should take a look at it. And so for me, I know that it's really sticky, but it makes a little bit of a sense.
What do you think?
I think Trump looks a lot better after you read that transcript than before when we could only go on people's descriptions of what happened.
That he withheld aid or threatened aid if he didn't.
There's not only no threat in there, I think what really comes through when you read the whole thing is that this isn't Trump pressuring the Ukrainian guy. They're in total agreement that this is a weird thing that ought to be looked at. The Ukrainian president says, I'm trying to drain the swamp here, just like you did there, and talking about how it's kind of a new day in Ukraine.
But he doesn't look exactly like Pope Francis either, this guy, where he says, I'd love to meet you. Maybe we travel on your plane and not my plane, whatever. This is a little weird.
Well, that's a different question.
I agree.
But that point where I think is really significant, just to kind of push back against this narrative that this is Trump kind of strong-arming this guy, it's the Ukrainian president who brings up Rudy Giuliani.
Right.
He says, I want to learn more from him. This is an issue we need to study.
After the whole Russian collusion thing issue and whether there was a there, DeRoy, do you worry that the timing, after all of that, to talk to the leader of a foreign power, essentially about inserting himself into potentially another U.S. election, that let's say it's not, an impeachable offense, it is offensive, right? I mean, where does it go? Now, you'd have to have proof that nothing else untoward happened here, and there might be other phone calls where this issue of aid was brought up, but at least at this one, the one in question, it does not. But what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I went through this looking for the pressure, the strong arm tactics, any sort of extortive behavior, language, nothing like that. It was a very friendly call. One thing in here that's unfortunate is you actually hear the comments from Zelensky about his discussions with Angela Merkel of Germany and Macron of France.
She's cheap. She doesn't help
correct.
out. Right?
And that's not good to have that get out there. So we have this, which normally would be classified in secret, now spilled out there because the Democrats have brought us to this point. So that, I think, weakens our national security and diplomacy.
But we were talking about the market reaction. I'm seeing things through that prism, alone for the time being, Danielle, and their interpretation was pretty much DeRoy's and pretty much Mr. Freeman's here, that nothing will come of this. Now, that's assuming there aren't other phone calls, there aren't other transcripts to come, there aren't other conversations that maybe this issue did come up. There's no way. No, I believe Adam Schiff was raising that possibility in comments today. He also wants the whistleblower's report and the whistleblower himself to come forward and talk about this. So where do you see all this going? Because the market doesn't see, for the time being, it going anywhere.
So as of right now, we have the S&P up about 7 points. We're not experiencing any type of disaster today, especially after yesterday. Yesterday, we experienced that knee-jerk reaction. The S&P traded lower about 1%. The stock market does not like bad news, especially an impeachment of the president. However, what I saw last night personally, President Trump spent quite a lot of time on Twitter last night defending himself, and he has this way where he's now able to communicate with the American people, and he's able to, talk about what is coming out about him. And so the market's not sitting here waiting, wondering what's going to happen. We have the transcripts now. And so as of right now, the market's stable, but it doesn't mean that something in the future can't come out that will make it worse.
Yeah, one of the things I do, and I know you do it as well, James, is I like to watch all the news channels. And it's all horrible for the president. He's evil incarnate. I'll let you guess. And then every others, where the president is Father O'Malley. Okay, so I usually look at this and I say, there's probably in between here. There's some things that are offensive that I raised with DeRoy. But there are other things that just say, all right, you need a little bit more than this to go on. Now, I like the convenience of seeing it through the prism of the markets because they abhor uncertainty, and especially the uncertainty of a president who has led a market and economy that they like. They might not flip over him, but they like what's been done under his leadership. And that was the environment for Bill Clinton, if you think about it, during his impeachment proceeding. It was the backdrop. And I like to think it saved his bacon here. And I like to think just the opposite undid Richard Nixon, who probably would have been brought down regardless. But I think hyperinflation and a recession, stagflation as it later became known, didn't help Richard Nixon. I think
the market is not perfect every day. I think it's efficient over the long term. Day to day, maybe not so much, but I think it does provide a nice check on political rhetoric because it has people putting their money on the line versus cost-free opinions.
But they can just as easily take their money offline.
They can. And I think that's been this is part of the story of the Trump presidency is a lot of noise out of Washington that we have a fundamental threat to our republic and the rule of law. Investors do not like investing in countries without rule of law. It's not good for growth. It's not good for property rights. They shun them. So it's essentially been the opposite in this era. Now, when it's basically trade that's been driving it and interest rates more than people thinking, wow, Trump's really screwing up the American experiment. So I think in that way, it is a helpful barometer. It's not the be-all, end-all. It can't obviously predict the future, but it's a best guess to say a lot of what you're hearing in Washington is noise.
Danielle, if the market's impression thus far is there's no there, or there's nothing here that can stick. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but I've watched enough law shows like Law and Order, for example, to be an expert. And I don't see anything so far to dislodge markets. But what do you think?
No, I don't see anything thus far to dislodge markets either. And I mean, President Trump, he has a really strong record with the economy. He has a really strong record with the stock market.
Do you think people will come to expect this? DeRoy kind of touched, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but this is not a shocker.
No, it's not a shocker at all. I mean, ever since even before President Trump was elected, there have been multiple instances trying to kind of bring him down, per se.
None of them have worked, right, DeRoy? None of them
they haven't worked.
Yeah, I mean, we hear every week or two that we have a new scandal and everyone freaks out and then it calms back down. I think you may actually have some legislative gridlock in D.C. The Democrats aren't going to be in much of a mood to pass anything that's helpful, which is the bad news. The good news is gridlock can be a good thing, and I don't think very much bad things will get passed. And if we, again, continue to have a 21% corporate tax rate and deregulation and so on, I think the market fundamentals will continue, the economy will keep growing, and that may overshadow the clouds that may be lingering overhead.
Well, I think a big thing to watch for is if Trump gets hurt politically and Biden gets hurt politically. And so you end up looking at a bigger probability of an Elizabeth Warren presidency where you're talking about outlawing entire industries, really fundamental changes in the role of government. I think you're just getting nervous because of this wealth tax and the Freeman fortune. I wish.
All right, Or we'll have a lot more on that, by the way, because some of these plans are doozies, and they're going to raise a lot of money, but they're also going to chase away a lot of money right after this.